Are the Falcons about to pull off a big Trey Hendrickson trade?
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, where right now new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. So if you do not know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, aka Mr. Drew, aka the iron that sharpens the iron, aka Mr. aka, and I've been covering the Atlanta Falcons for almost 2 decades, formerly at FalcFans.com, RIP, still going strong on this illustrious podcast. And I thank each and every one of you that go strong with me as everydayers. That means you make this podcast your first listen each and every day. And all you have to do to become an everydayer is subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts and get the latest episode as soon as it is available. So today I'm joined, of course, by Jarvis Davis of Locked On Sports Atlanta, and we are gearing up to wrap up this week ahead of a big blockbuster week of moves across the NFL, and perhaps there's going to be a big blockbuster trade in the Falcons horizon. We'll talk about that coming up. But of course, later in the episode, we will be talking about the Drew Dalman dilemma and whether or not the Falcons should fork up the cash to keep him in Atlanta. We'll talk about some of the restricted free agent moves and how that may influence their upcoming free agent plans. But, Jarvis, Falcons may be monitoring. Let's use the correct report. They're monitoring a big fish when it comes to their potential pass rush, according to Jordan Schultz of Fox Sports, not reporting from a Starbucks, but out here talking about the Falcons are monitoring the status of Trey Hendrickson, the Cincinnati Bengals pass rusher that led the NFL in sacks with 17.5 sacks this past season, as a potential trade option now that the Cincinnati Bengals have finally, after year plus of Trey Hendrickson being like, hey, pay me or trade me, they're finally going, okay, well, Trey, if you think someone else is going to pay you more than what we're offering, then maybe you have the opportunity to trade him. So, Jarvis, when you see this news breaking that the Falcons are monitoring Trey Hendrickson, what's going across your mind?
I get happy. You talking about a guy who finished second in voting in Defensive Player of the Year, first team All-Pro, his first time making it, All-Pro. And when you think about, going back to when he was his Saints days, right? That contract year, I think we had 13.5 sacks. And the Saints was like, nah, man, we ain't, we got Cam Jordan, get going about your way. The Bengals did their thing, and that man hasn't had single digits since 2022. Since he became a starter. So 1 year out of the years he's been with, the last year with the Saints and then those years with the Cincinnati Bengals. So I get happy when I hear them potentially monitoring the situation, right? Because, we had a conversation yesterday about on Locked On Sports Atlanta about potentially looking at Joey Bosa. This has been the guy that been often injured, right? Like there'll be a big chance, and we don't know if he'll fit into the Falcon ethos. You know what I'm saying? Like that's an aspect that you have to take in consideration as well. He's a free agent. You don't have to trade for him. So it was just like he kind of weighing things out. But when I hear that the Falcons are monitoring the situation, and I did say in that conversation when we talking about Joey Bosa is the type of player that the Falcons should be looking at. And I think Trey Hendrickson more than fits the bill when it comes to the type of player that the Falcons need to be taking a look at. And I know people are saying that, they don't have that much draft conversation, but like once you got to take a look at this thing, right? Man, only got 1 year left on his contract. And we saw what Deebo Samuel went for. When he had 1 year left on this deal, and essentially they're going to have to figure out how they're going to pay him, or a contract is probably going to get worked out at some point with him. And for the Falcons, they're going to have to figure it out, right? I'm not saying they're going to be a 5th round pick, but the compensation is going to be in that realm. You're not talking about a 1st round pick. That's not going to happen. 2nd round pick either, I don't think. So when you think about monitoring that situation, what the Falcons need, this is what the Falcons need. And if Terry can figure out a way to get it done, which I feel like he does at least have that type of move in him. I think he has one move like that in him because Terry is good for that in free agency. I'll rock with Terry on the free agency side, right? Versus the draft side. So if they're monitoring that situation, that means that I feel like Terry probably going to get ready to go for it, depending on what the other teams or suitors are willing to offer. And that's the only thing I feel that'll kind of brought them out. If other teams saying, hey, man, we'll give you a 3rd round pick in this year's draft. And Terry going to be like, get it up for Matthew Judon.
Yeah, it's a great point, Jarvis, that you bring up because we've been down this road before with the Falcons trying to get a pass rusher. Montez Sweat 2 years ago, where the Falcons were reported to offering a 3rd, and in Chicago was like, what about that 2nd, though? And then Washington was like, we'll take the 2nd. And so that's, I think, the thing that is keeping me calm, right? When it comes to this news with Trey Hendrickson, just because there's probably going to be a lot of teams that are interested in the NFL's leading sack guy, the guy that's top 3, that when you look at who's had the most sacks the last 2-3 seasons, it's Myles Garrett, it's TJ Watt, it's Trey Hendrickson, right? The AFC North, man, they just been cooking pass rushers. No one wants to play quarterback in the AFC North, right? When you think about Trey Hendrickson, he's up there in age. He's approaching that age where we talk about pass rushers 31, 32 starting to fall off. We saw that with Matthew Judon this year. So there's risk involved with Trey Hendrickson and paying him the type of money. Now you see Max Crosby getting $35 million, Nick Bosa getting $35 million. I think Trey probably not pushing that much, but he probably wants to get in the 30s, certainly. And so that's a lot of money to be paying for a guy that, might start to dip in a year or two or whatever. But I sit here and I go, look, man, the Falcons need a guy that can go out there and get after the quarterback. And if you're worried about, he's going to be the only guy in Atlanta.
2027, he might fall off.
Yeah.
Terry ain't got that time, that kind of time, dog.
Yeah. Terry should not be worried about 2027. So I think with Trey Hendrickson, he was a one-man wrecking crew for that Bengals. Like they had Sam Hubbard fell off. BJ Hill wasn't that guy. They lost DJ Reader. Everybody knew you had to block that guy. You had to double team. You had to slide your protections to him. And he still got 17.5 sacks this year, guys. And so that is the type of player that if you're going to spin big, whether you're throwing a 4th this year and a conditional pick next year, and then dropping that $30 million contract with however many guarantees on it that Trey Hendrickson's looking to sort of cash out to close out his career, I think he's the type of player that's worth it. But I gotta stay grounded, Jarvis, because again, as we said, like other teams can swoop in and be like, well, they're offering a 4th and a 3rd. How about that 2nd, though? You want that, and then Cincinnati's going to be like, well, sorry, Terry, but we got to do what we got to do. But we'll see.
No doubt. So you know where I'm going now. All right, so we talked about this a little bit with, Drew Dalman and, on Locked On Sports Atlanta, on Atlanta Football Party, about overpaying for a guy like Drew. There's going to be consequences for that, or there's going to be a domino effect, or, how you kind of refer to it is if the Falcons get into that conversation about Trey Hendrickson, would you be okay if they cut Grady Jarrett to get it done?
Would I be okay? No, I would not be okay because I'm just like, you finally got the help that Grady Jarrett needed, and you got it. That's despicable behavior, So I would not be okay with that, Jarvis. But I understand. It's one of those situations where, like, I get it. Like I'm not going to sit here and be like, how this is the as you said, there are consequences and repercussions to making this type of move, but. Yeah, boy, I would just love to have just one season of Grady. One season, just can we figure it out with Grady? Just one season, so that Grady can be like, just send this man out in style. That's all I ask for, man.
Convert some of this salary to a signing bonus. You know what I'm saying? Spread it out. Give me a board.
However you need to do it with the funny money, whatever you got to do.
Oh, that funny money, bro. Oh, man. And that's the thing I feel that Grady deserves. as much as I bring it up, I know people feel like I bring it up a lot, like, oh, Jarvis wants to cut Grady. No, I don't. I don't want to cut Grady. But at some point, you have to start building something tangible on the defensive side of the football. You haven't done that. You've been doing quick fixes. And I think that, Trey, for what the Falcons want to do, they want to make the playoffs in 2025. That's the goal. They have to make the playoffs in 2025 from my point of view. So a guy that's 30, right at 30, right? Like you said, you might have 1 or 2 years of really good production. Shoot, man. Yeah, that's worth $26 million a year. So I feel this is something that the Falcons need to move towards. They're monitoring it. That makes me happy. All right, cool. I'm good with that. But man, if they have to cut Grady, oh gosh, I will be sad. I will be sad. I would be sad, but man, I'll be so happy that Trey is in the building.
It's mixed feelings because it's like we've been here for 7 years being like, man, can we get Grady some help? And then the Falcons get Grady some help. And like, well, Grady, it's not you that we're helping. It's Ruka Roro that we're going to be wind up helping. And it's like, all right, man, I'm going to feel some type of way about it. But at the same time, if Trey Hendrickson, gets 16 sacks, I think I'll be okay. I think I'll be okay. So
can you imagine that? Oh, can you just imagine that? I was looking at some interesting numbers the other day. So I was looking at when Chuck Smith came in and when Patrick Kearney, got drafted. Both of them, they got drafted. And the first 2 years that they were in the league, both of them had a combined 5 sacks each, for those years. And then they started dropping the double-digit sacks on. I was like, man. And it just really kind of put it in perspective. It was like, all right, there is a scenario where you draft a guy at 15 and he might not be that productive in the first year. You know what I'm saying? Like, you can't count on him to be that productive. Like special dudes, true enough. Yeah, special dudes come in, they're super productive in the first year. And they can be productive without getting so many sacks, right? So you can just being from a TFL standpoint, just being disruptive and just getting a lot of pressures and all that stuff. So like they need a veteran guy that you can count on coming off the edge. That's how you rebuild this thing up. That's why I feel like Trey would be a perfect fit for that. So yeah, even the best pass rushers that we've seen don a Falcons uniform, it took some time for those guys to kind of get acclimated to the next level. So yeah, you don't want your first round pick because we know for a fact that they're going to draft an edge rusher. 1,000% is going down. So yeah, you got to get a veteran guy to kind of help bring them along in that process.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Jarvis. You look at the defensive rookie of the year, Jared Verse, right? Yeah. Had almost a historic number of pressures this past season, but only 4.5 sacks. Yeah. So as you say, you can be disruptive, but you may not get that sort of sack production. And we know this fan base, everybody. We're starving for sacks. So it's one of those things. Trey Hendrickson,
bro.
Yeah, produces it. And we'll see. We'll keep it monitored, guys, as the Falcons are monitoring Trey Hendrickson all weekend long, see if a deal gets worked out. Obviously, any trades that happen this week and this weekend won't become official until Wednesday. So lots of moving parts on that when it comes to Trey Hendrickson trade talk, but still more to come on today's Locked On Falcons, talking about Drew Dalman and whether or not his future is in Atlanta or he's about to price himself out of Atlanta. And we'll talk about that as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. So when the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on that action than when FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because with FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, whether it's the opening tip-off or that fourth quarter comeback, whether you make it for the opening tip-off or you're, waiting for that fourth quarter comeback, FanDuel is going to let you stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can combine your bets in a same-game parlay. We love a same-game parlay. Bet a little, win a lot, all in the same game. Over, under, points, rebounds, steals, whatever you're into. First half, who's ahead, all that and more is available at FanDuel. And if you sign up, and new customers get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. So let's talk about sort of the big story when it comes to the Falcons free agents approach. There's been buzz building around the Falcons top free agent in center Drew Dalman for over a month now that he's going to head to literally greener pastures this offseason. We had a similar conversation about Falcons right tackle Caleb McGarry a couple of years ago, where he was headed to free agency, and it looked like that market for the right tackle position was going to be a little too pricey for the Falcons, but they were able to get him and retain him on a hometown discount. Do you think Dalman could be slated for a similar fate and stick in Atlanta, or is he about to cash out as one of the NFL's highest paid centers next week?
I don't know. I mean, that's a good question. Just being around those guys, in the locker room and, being around those guys out there at training camp and stuff like that, Drew seems like a guy that he might be willing to do that. But I know what his agent is going to be pushing for. His agent is going to be pushing for him to go get that bag. And that's what he has the opportunity to do, being the best center on the free agent market right now. And when you talk about, what he succeeds in, we'll talk about that aspect of it first, right? Because that makes the most sense. Zone scheme, running game. If you one of those teams that kind of has that, similar, Sean McVay-ish, wide zone scheme, don't necessarily have to be this pound and ground type, team. And you like to move those feet and get outside of folks and get those defensive linemen running east and west. Oh, shoot, Drew Dalman is your guy. So I feel like, and there are a lot of offenses that run that wide zone scheme in the league now. So it's too many factors for me to say that, hey, this guy's going to take a hometown discount. Oh yeah, that's great that y'all offering me $15 million a year, but I'm gonna take 10 from the Falcons, because I like playing next to Chris Lindstrom. I don't know who's built like that, If he's built like that, oh my gosh, you talking about Falcons ethos? Ooh, that's a real word. I'm going to start using that word if Drew Dalman does that, because that is a guy that you pray to have to bring into your locker room that's willing to take that less amount of money, in order to just kind of stick around from a continuity standpoint and just being in sync, with this organization. So yeah, I don't think so, man. It's almost unrealistic. And let's keep it funky. It's a reason why Caleb McGarry was willing to accept what he got from the Falcons. I mean, shoot, I don't think nobody was banging down the door like that for Caleb, because especially when they didn't pick up his 5th-year option. The Falcons played hardball. They was like, hey, man, you gonna have to prove it, Doc. And shoot, hey, he did enough. He did just enough to get another contract. And I don't think that other teams were willing to come in and say, oh, yeah, we're willing to offer you this. But I think that Drew is he hit the market at the right time, and I think he's going to take advantage of it, man. And it will be very hard for him to say no to the type of money that he's going to get on the open market.
Yeah, I think all that's fair. We'll see. It's obviously Drew Dalman has every right to cash out at this point in time. Sure. And we'll see if he does. As you mentioned, there's a lot of teams out there. I've said I think the Falcons are the best fit for him because of the style of offense that they run, as you mentioned. But you're right. There's a lot of teams out there that are looking for a guy that can, excel in a zone scheme. I've seen San Francisco with Kyle Shanahan's offense, right? With Ben Johnson in Chicago now. They need a center. And the Lions were the second most zone team in the league last year. Houston's been a name that's thrown out there. Seattle with their need at center and getting Clint Kubiak, who we know loves to run that zone stuff. So there will be a lot of suitors out there. And so therefore, I think the price for Drew Dalman may be a little bit too rich for the Atlanta Falcons. And basically my stance on it is it's if the Falcons are going to get into that sort of bidding war and up their offer to make sure that Drew Dalman doesn't make it to market, because basically if we're sitting here on Monday morning without a contract extension, when that legal tampering period opens up at noon Eastern time, I think the chances of him being back in Atlanta are extremely low. And so
it's funny that you bring up the 49ers, because you know where Daddy played, right?
Yes, I do. I do. And our guy Locked On 49ers, Brian Peacock, has for 4 years been asking me, hey, what's Drew Dalman doing? He's had his eye on Drew Dalman for 4 years, waiting for this opportunity to strike. So
perfect fit.
Yeah. So it's one of those things where, like, if the Falcons are going to up their offer over the weekend to try to make sure that Drew Dalman does not make it to market, to me, it boils down to how much are the Falcons willing to pay for the stability that Drew Dalman brings. Not necessarily, we're not looking at Drew Dalman as one of the world's best centers or anything like that, but he is a solid guy. He's been, solid and stable for that unit. And of course, that center position is so important, particularly when you have a young quarterback developing. And so that's really what the Falcons are going to be paying for. And, depending on where they fall and where many of the listeners fall, like, you could say, that's probably definitely worth $8 million. It's probably worth $10 million, maybe even worth $12 million. But we start creeping up there towards $15 million. It's like, it's a little tough.
Hey, here's the thing. Like, I feel like there are consequences to your actions, right? We understand the consequences that the Falcons are going to have to pay for bringing in Kirk Cousins and all that whole debacle, right? With all the monies and everything, there are going to be some consequences for that. So I feel if you start creeping up into that 14, 15, 16, maybe, you're going to have to make, you talking about 16 million. There's somebody on the defense side of the football, and I said this on Atlanta Football Party. I said right here on Locked On Falcons. Hey, man, if you want to pay that type of money to Drew, you might have to cut Grady. Just saying. Like, because it can't be, oh, yeah, we're going to keep Grady on the roster. Oh, and we're going to sign him for 15, 16, and then what you going to do? I guess you're going to go talk to Chris and restructure, you probably going to have to do that anyway if you want to have some money to spend in free agency. You're going to have to cut David Onyemata at least to get up under the salary cap. So it's just so many moving parts, man, or consequences, like I said, that come with paying too much for your guy, right? I understand wanting to resign your guy. I get it. But once you start creeping up into that 14, 15, even 13, you're like, hey, man, that money got to come from somewhere. And it's gonna make you make a tough decision. And I don't think the Falcons want to make that one.
Yeah. It's you talk about consequences. Ripple effects is another way of putting it, where it's like, if you're going to pay the premium to stabilize the offensive line, that means the ripple effect is maybe you have to destabilize another area of your roster, and sort of mentioning, the potential of cutting someone like Grady Jarrett and saving $16 million against the salary cap. That would be destabilizing, I think, in a lot of ways. So we'll see what the Falcons do.
That'll be rebuilding your defense.
Yes.
The word that they don't want to use.
Yeah, you're basically tearing it down to the studs at that point in time.
Absolutely.
So we'll see if the Falcons are willing to do that. It doesn't sound like they're willing to go that far, and they may have enough trust in a restricted free agent in Ryan Nuzul to potentially fill some of that Drew Dalman size void. But the Falcons may not have as much trust in some of their other restricted free agents, as we got word on Thursday that certain guys like Nate Landman and Drew D. Alford are going to be able to test the market. And we'll break that down as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. So a report from Greg Allman of Fox Sports on Thursday said that 2 of the Falcons, I believe 6 restricted free agents in Nate Landman and D. Alford will not be tendered and thus allowed to test themselves on the open market as unrestricted free agents next week. And as I explained on yesterday's episode here on Locked On Falcons, breaking down how restricted free agency works, we talked about this being a possibility that could happen for a way for the Falcons to save a little bit of money. If they can re-sign both of those guys at veteran minimum contracts rather than, extending those restricted free agent tenders, even the lowest one, that's potentially saving you about $2 million for each one of these guys. But, I think in both guys' cases, you certainly could argue that the Falcons might be looking to move on as opposed to bringing both of these guys back. Because I think with how both Alford and Landman played in 2024, I think most would agree that they probably played at a replaceable level, that you can upgrade both of those spots at linebacker and nickel cornerback. And so with that in mind, Jarvis, what are your thoughts on the decisions to do this with Landman and Alford, as well as could this possibly be signaling that nickel cornerback, that linebacker position are 2 spots that the Falcons may prioritize, maybe trying to fill next week in free agency, as opposed to waiting until the draft to fill those?
I think that, first of all, I feel like if you go into free agency, trying to get a corner, good luck. That's going to be expensive. I'm sorry, because there's going to be some guys with some that are names that you're like, man, they paid XYZ $9 million a year. Holy man, what's going on here? So I feel like these decisions were made in order to play a little hardball. And I don't think Landman is worth bringing back. I mean, God bless him. I really appreciate Nate Landman because he's kind of old school style player, but I think he just didn't look right once he came back from injury. He just didn't look like himself. And himself was a 2-down player. And in today's NFL, that just doesn't fit. You don't matter when you're a 2-down player as a linebacker in today's league. So for me, I feel like I'm not surprised by it, but I think Alford is interesting. I would at least have that conversation. Alford at a veteran minimum. Shoot, like, come on, man. Like you got a lot of starts on this belt, and like I said, I know he had a little sketchy season last year, but before that, there was some potential indeed, right? Enough for him to be the starter at that nickel spot, right? And I thought that, he had some decent production, coming into this season. So for me, I would have that conversation. I would broach that conversation with him. But Nate Landman, I think he's kind of fizzled out. I think as a player, I think he's no more than a special teams player at this point in his career, and it's unfortunate, but I mean it's kind of what it is. So yeah, I'm not surprised at all that Terry is. Because I'm all about finding value, and it seems like Terry is all about finding value too. If you can bring D Alford back on a veteran minimum, shoot, do it. 1-year deal. Let's go. You want to come back? Let's do it.
Yeah. And I was telling the Locked On Falcons Insiders earlier today, join at the link in the description below, 14-day free trial, then $4.99 a month. They get, my thoughts on some of these things hours before you guys, the rest of you do on the podcast. But I was basically saying, like, at this point, I think Landman is like 5th in the pecking order. Where you look at that linebacker where you have Caden Ellis. Hopefully they'll get an upgrade at that number 2 linebacker spot next to Caden Ellis. You have Troy Anderson and JD Bertrand as depth pieces. And then you're right with Landman being a special teams guy, but I just think Anderson and Bertrand are just going to bring a little bit more on special teams. Like you love the physicality that Landman brings to that, but special teams, you gotta be able to run and hit, and the hit part, Landman checks that box. The run part is a little bit sketchier. So that's where I do agree with you, where you can probably find a better option if that's the role that you're envisioning for Nate Landman. I agree with you on Alford. And that's kind of why I asked the question, Jarvis, because it's like Alford gives you a body at that nickel cornerback spot. As you mentioned, the 22 and 23, he played well enough to the point that this past summer, like no one was really questioning him and asking the Falcons to bring in somebody to push him for that starting spot. And then you all saw kind of the bottom fall out this past season. But I think there's hope, based off of 3 years, that he's had more good play than bad play. Just unfortunately, the bad play stuck out a little bit too much towards the end of this past season.
Find a weakness, dog. They keep coming, bro. Every week they'll come. They're like, oh, 37? Oh, yeah, that's where we're going.
Yeah.
It happens, man.
So I do wonder a little bit, what is the plan at nickel quarterback? Do we see Mike Hughes get re-signed? He's an unrestricted free agent. We've seen him man that spot. Are the Falcons planning on moving someone like Clark Phillips, who's played primarily outside, inside? You got a guy, Natron Brooks, right? That nickel cornerback spot needs someone that's going to be able to fill against the run. Well, Natron Brooks definitely is willing to fill against the run.
Yes.
The coverage stuff is maybe a little bit more questionable with him. That's the part you got to figure out. But you do have potential options to replace D. Alford, and you're right. Like, signing a cornerback is not going to be cheap. Is that a position that you think makes more sense for the Falcons to maybe wait on in the draft? Especially, they need potentially two corners, right? Like, do you prioritize nickel? Does that go in the back burner? Is that a mid to late round pick to throw into the mix in the competition? Sort of, how do you think the Falcons should resolve that issue?
Wow, that's a good question, man, because there are a lot of scenarios that were just boiling in my brain when you were talking. I was like, okay, maybe the Falcons can put Clark down at nickel and see how he goes, right? And you could draft a guy in that second round, because I feel like if you talking about the outside corner, unless it's Mike Hughes, I feel like Mike Hughes, you might be able to get back at a decent number. I thought he did it fine. But like I said, I'm all about getting young and cheap, especially at positions like that, because you're paying the other one 18, 19, $20 million. So you don't want to be paying, you want those things to be staggered, right? You don't never want to be in a space where you're paying guys that, the 8-figure deals on your edges, and your doggone defensive linemen aren't doing jack squat right now. So I feel like if the Falcons were to kind of see what they can get out of Clark down at the nickel, and I will bring D back. I like that depth piece, right? Like, say, hey, D, we're gonna bring you back, but here's your competition. Beat him out. That's a dude that, and Clark, he got some playmaking ability, coming out of college or whatever. But he's a smallish guy. I don't see him on that outside. I'm not comfortable with it. I know he played it and he was okay, but like I said, people will find you. They're going to find you in this league, especially when you got AJ Terrell playing on the other side, especially if you're going to have AJ Terrell following guys more. Hopefully that's the case this year with the Falcons playing a little bit more aggressive style of defense. So, yeah, I feel like second round corner is probably where I would land. I would try to see what Clark Phillips and D. Alford could potentially do in a competition during camp. Hey, man, y'all go over there. Y'all battle it out. Whoever wins, right? And I'll be okay, perfectly fine with that. So I think that the Falcons are going to have to look at it from that standpoint. Wherever the most targets are going to go, or which is that corner opposite of AJ Terrell, I feel, unless you got somebody that's just absolutely just garbage at that nickel spot, that's where I go in the draft. So I'm going to try to find somebody in the draft on that corner opposite AJ Terrell, probably more specifically in the second round.
Okay. So that's going to do it for us here, guys. And, full disclosure, we had to sort of rearrange this episode because Jarvis and I were talking about another potential addition of a 30-plus-year-old edge rusher in Khalil Mack as his sort of dream signing this offseason as the last segment. And then the Trey Hendrickson news broke, and we had to kind of adjust on the fly. And so that segment with Jarvis talking about why he would be in favor of signing Khalil Mack, I think we'll punt till tomorrow, and we'll have another episode. We'll have some weekend content for you guys talking about some potential replacement options for Drew Dalman. We'll talk about how the Falcons can sort of maneuver their cap situation and money to fit a guy like Trey Hendrickson. I know a lot of people have questions about how proactive can the Falcons be, and we've discussed that before in the pod, but I think it's worth revisiting potentially tomorrow, especially if big moves like these are looming for the Falcons. So that is all in store for you. We'll probably continue to get more news and breakdowns this weekend and whatnot. So, continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. And of course, make sure you check out the Locked On NFL Draft podcast with Keith Sanchez, Damian Parson, to get you guys geared up for who the Falcons and other teams will be drafting in the 2025 NFL Draft. It is all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.